Welcome to Future Epoch, where we learn more about our world. For over a decade, one of the most trusted names in American banking was quietly running a fraud operation from the inside. Not hackers, not outside criminals, but the bank itself, through its own employees, pressured and incentivized to open accounts that customers never asked for and never knew about. By the time regulators caught up with Wells Fargo, millions of Americans had been affected, thousands of employees had been fired or pushed out, and one of the largest financial institutions on earth had been caught in one of the most damaging corporate scandals of the 21st century. Wells Fargo is one of America's 4 largest banks. Founded in 1852 during the California Gold Rush, it built a reputation over more than a century and a half as a community-focused institution, a bank for ordinary Americans. By the 2000s, it was consistently ranked among the most admired companies in the United States, celebrated for its stable management and, above all, its cross-selling model. Cross-selling means convincing existing customers to open additional accounts and take on additional products. If someone has a checking account, perhaps they also need a savings account, a credit card, a mortgage, a car loan, or a home equity line of credit. The logic is straightforward. Customers who hold multiple products with one bank are less likely to leave and more profitable to serve. Wells Fargo turned this strategy into something close to a corporate religion. Its internal target was captured in a memorable internal phrase, 8 is great. 8 products per customer household. The entire retail banking operation was built around reaching that number. The roots of the scandal stretch back to at least 2002, when internal complaints about fraudulent account openings first appeared in company records. Employees were reporting that colleagues were opening accounts without customer knowledge in order to hit sales targets. Those complaints were largely ignored. Under the leadership of Chief Executive John Stumpf, the cross-selling culture intensified through the 2000s and into the 2010s. Branch managers faced daily and weekly sales quotas. Employees who failed to meet their numbers were placed on performance improvement plans, reassigned, or pushed out entirely. Some managers reportedly held pre-shift meetings to drill quota expectations into staff before the branch doors had even opened. Workers described the environment as relentless and demeaning. Some employees resorted to opening accounts for family members without their awareness. Others moved customer funds between accounts without consent to temporarily satisfy their targets. Employees who raised concerns through internal channels or the company's whistleblower hotline described facing retaliation rather than protection. Some were terminated shortly after filing complaints. Others reported that managers dismissed their concerns or instructed them to keep hitting their numbers regardless. The bank later acknowledged firing thousands of employees who had participated in the fraud, but critics pointed out consistently that the institutional conditions had created the fraud in the first place. The person most directly responsible for the retail banking operation was Carrie Tolstedt, who led the community banking division and was closely associated with the cross-selling strategy. She was widely praised inside the company, with Chief Executive John Stumpf publicly calling her the best banker in America. She announced her retirement in July 2016, shortly before the full scale of the scandal became public, and initially departed with a package worth tens of millions of dollars. The central tension in the Wells Fargo scandal is not simply about fraud. It is about what happens when institutional incentives override individual ethics at every level of an organization. Most of the employees who opened fraudulent accounts were not senior executives making calculated decisions to deceive customers. They were tellers, personal bankers, and branch staff earning modest wages, facing daily pressure from managers who were themselves under pressure from regional directors who reported to corporate leadership. The system created conditions in which honest conduct led to termination and dishonest conduct was rewarded with continued employment. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and the Los Angeles City Attorney jointly investigated the bank, and in September 2016 announced a settlement totaling $185 million. At the time, It was one of the largest penalties ever levied against a retail bank for consumer violations. The CFPB's investigation found that employees had opened approximately 2 million deposit and credit card accounts that customers had not authorized between 2011 and 2015. Later reviews extended that figure further. What followed was a public reckoning that few corporate executives had faced in recent memory. John Stumpf was summoned before the United States Senate Banking Committee in September 2016. Senator Elizabeth Warren told him to his face that he had led a massive, years-long scam and called for him to resign and face criminal charges. The hearing was broadcast live and widely viewed. Stumpf, who had initially deflected blame toward individual employees rather than the culture he had overseen, was unable to mount a convincing defense. He announced his resignation as chief executive in October 2016, just weeks after the hearing concluded. The financial and regulatory consequences were severe and prolonged. In February 2018, the Federal Reserve took the extraordinary step of imposing an asset cap on Wells Fargo, restricting the bank from growing its total balance sheet beyond the level it had reached at the end of 2017. It was a punishment without modern precedent for a bank of Wells Fargo's size, effectively placing a ceiling on the company's ability to expand until regulators were satisfied with its internal reforms. In February 2020, the bank reached a $3 billion settlement with the United States Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission to resolve criminal and civil investigations into the scandal. The SEC's portion addressed Wells Fargo's misleading of investors about the scale and sustainability of its cross-selling program, presenting inflated metrics to the market as evidence of genuine customer relationships, when many of those relationships had been fabricated. In December 2022, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau imposed an additional order requiring Wells Fargo to pay $3.7 billion, which was the largest CFPB penalty in the agency's history at that time. The order found that the bank had harmed customers not only through unauthorized accounts, but also through improper mortgage servicing, illegal vehicle repossessions, and incorrect fees and interest charges across multiple product lines. The total cost to Wells Fargo, across fines, settlements, legal fees, and remediation payments to affected customers, ran into many billions of dollars over the course of the investigations. The Federal Reserve's asset cap remained in place for years after it was imposed. The bank's reputation, carefully cultivated over more than a century and a half, had suffered a damage that no advertising campaign could easily repair. The Wells Fargo scandal is often presented as a story about fraud, and it is. But it is more fundamentally a story about how institutional culture shapes individual behavior. The bank did not hire thousands of dishonest employees. It created conditions in which honest employees found it nearly impossible to survive, while those who cut corners were rewarded with continued employment and sometimes advancement. Every organization that sets aggressive targets without equally robust ethical oversight faces some version of this risk. The pressure to perform is not unique to banking. What the Wells Fargo case makes visible is the speed at which a performance culture can corrupt when oversight is weak, when internal reporting is punished rather than protected, and when executives take credit for results without asking too many questions about how those results were achieved. The individual customers who were harmed, some charged fees on accounts they never knew existed, others who saw their credit scores damaged by credit card applications made in their names without their knowledge, were often unaware for years that anything had happened. The harm was real but hidden, and that invisibility was not incidental to the fraud. In a meaningful sense, it was the design. The story of Wells Fargo is not a closed chapter. The Federal Reserve's asset cap remained in place for years after the scandal broke, a continuing signal that regulators had not concluded the bank had fully repaired what was broken inside it. Senior executives faced civil charges and financial penalties, but no individual leader was ultimately convicted of criminal wrongdoing, a fact that drew sustained criticism from consumer advocates and legislators who argued that without meaningful personal consequences for those at the top, the incentives that produced the scandal remained largely unchanged. The deeper question the Wells Fargo case leaves open is whether the problem was specific to one institution or whether the conditions that created it, relentless targets, weak internal oversight, and a culture that rewards performance above all else, exist in some form across the financial industry more broadly. That question matters because no fine, however large, changes an industry's underlying incentives. Only changed structures and genuine accountability can do that. Whether those changes have taken hold at Wells Fargo or anywhere else is something only the next crisis will reveal. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel.